Welcome to our series of interviews with JAMS authors, which give you a peek behind the scholarship that we publish in the Journal of the American Musicological Society. I'm Esther Morgan Ellis. I'm the digital multimedia editor for JAMS, and today I am talking with Dr. Mark Everist, whose article, Resonances from Beyond the Grave, Music and the Occult in 19th-Century Paris, appeared in Volume 78, Issue 3. Welcome, Dr. Everist.
It's a great pleasure to be here, and thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. So, could you please give us a brief summary of the topic of your article and your argument?
Thank you. Yes, the article, Resonances from Beyond the Grave, is really about music and the occult in the 1850s and 1860s in Paris. And it tells the story of a vogue for the séance in those decades that took Paris by storm. This is difficult to imagine these days, but a culture that suddenly adopted séances, turning tables, Ouija boards, more or less overnight, and kept it going for 2 decades, is really quite striking. Music played a central role in all of this activity. Just a couple of examples. There was a production of Weber's Oberon at the Théâtre Lyrique in the late 1850s. And according to one account published in a review called the Revue Spirit, the title tells you everything, in this performance, all the spare seats in the auditorium were occupied by spirits from the other world, including no less a person than Carl Maria von Weber himself, who was engaged by his interlocutor to tell a little bit the story of what was going on with his piece and what he thought about the current performance. He was moderately generous. He thought the singers were slightly underinvested, and at one point thought he could actually get onto the stage and assist them. The Revue Spirit is an interesting document because that tells us a lot about what was going on in séances in Paris in the 1850s and 1860s and what music was doing there. There are endless interviews with Mozart, Beethoven, Berlioz, Rossini, Aubert, Boieldieu, every composer that you might want to name and you might be interested. Even Handel is there at one point. And all these composers give their views on various types of music. They are all, in these seances and in the transcriptions of the seances, they are all very concerned with the difference between celestial music, the music they experience beyond the grave, and terrestrial music, the music that their interlocutors are familiar with. This is a theme that is adumbrated on many occasions and in many different ways. Obviously, they dictate music. There is a Mozart first movement piano sonata that was transcribed, published. There's even a YouTube recording in circulation today. Various other pieces of music are also dictated, transcribed, and so on. Especially important is a séance that took place on the Rue de Beaune, on the left bank in Paris. This was made up of the editorial board of a journal called Démocratie Pacifique, which had been banned by Napoleon III in 1852, in other words, just months before the vogue for séances hit Paris. It's a particularly interesting choice because the Démocratie Pacifique was one of the principal organs for Fourierisme. So it was all to do with questions of social engineering, social justice, and so on. And so it's no surprise that the séance led by the members of that editorial board occupied itself with many of those issues. But almost the entire membership of this séance were trained musicians. And so there was a remarkable series of dictations and transcriptions of music from beyond the grave that one of the members of the séance, Ali Bureau, took down from dictation, took home each night, wrote an accompaniment for, brought back the following day for approval by the spirits themselves. Very fortunately, all Bureau's transcriptions were published, and I've made a critical edition of those transcriptions there on a website, together with some recordings made on an instrument almost identical to the one that the séance moved into their apartment specifically so that they could try out terrestrial renditions of extraterrestrial music. So I've actually got a recording of one of these pieces dictated to the séance on the Rue de Beaune in the 1850s. It's a remarkable piece. It's called the Chant de la Terre dans l'espace, and it's here played on an 1850s Denain harmonium, exactly the same instrument that the séance brought up to their apartment to play through these pieces. Today, it's played by my distinguished colleague from the University of Southampton, David Owen Norris.
Amazing. So, what most fascinates you about your article's topic in this area of research?
It's so far beyond the types of things that one usually that one might usually deal with, even in the most exciting types of things. But I suppose what was interesting and exciting for me was engaging with questions of music and the ineffable, which is a kind of hot button topic, but in a way where there were actually materials to deal with. I actually had texts that engaged with music and the ineffable. I had musical texts that engaged with music and the ineffable, and that helped me work a way through talking about some of those issues in ways that was perhaps less abstract than if I had tried to do it any other way. But on the other hand, there are some fundamental epistemological questions. I mean, just how much of this material stands up to the most lightweight of scholarly scrutiny? On in a frame that places truth, falsehood, inauthenticity, authenticity in various corners, then it's very difficult to position some of these things. And I was delighted, I have to say, when I managed to smuggle the expression batshit crazy onto the first page of my article in JAMS. I'm not sure that the editorial team quite realized what they'd let through. But that was actually how I felt about much of this material for quite a lot of the time. And obviously, simply describing something as batshit crazy is not going to cut it for your average JAMS audience. So this was an interesting challenge, actually. It became even more of a challenge when it came the time to try and turn this into some kind of scholarly prose. How exactly you might frame that kind of batshit craziness in ways that kept you reasonably on the border of knowledge and imagination in ways that were even half credible.
So, could you tell us a little about how your article extends existing knowledge in musicology or this subfield, if it can even be said to exist, or other discussions about music?
Yes, I mean, I guess music and the occult really exists as a subfield. I mean, it's got a coherent literature to it. The subject goes right back to the Middle Ages and right up to the present. I mean, if someone is going to record and broadcast on YouTube a soi-disant Mozart sonata movement that was dictated from the other world at some point in the 1850s, then I think music and the occult is alive and well. I mean, I think what's interesting about this particular subject is that it drops into what was, to my mind, at any rate, a bit of a gap between the study of mesmerism, electromagnetism, and music around 1800, and then things like Theosophy and the Sainte Croix from 1900 onwards. I always had a kind of residual sense that that kind of lunacy had escaped mid 19th century Europe. How wrong I was. So that's it's a contribution to a subject that's ongoing, well established. There's a biggish literature. A lot of the literature on music on the occult focuses on the late 17th and early 18th century. So it's nice to have something from the common practice era. The other way in which the article, I think, extends knowledge is that it throws down a challenge to many of the conventional frames for studying the history of music. We're way beyond studies of works and composers, and we are well into studies of musical cultures, musical ecosystems, and so on. This does open up a very different culture to many of the ones that we think about. We think about music in the theatre, music in the church, music in the salon, music in the culture, in the concert hall, music and education, music and science, and so on. This adds another dimension to it, which I think is really very different, and extends, I think, that range of cultural domains in which music functions, I think, quite nicely. Yeah. And I suppose one final way in which the article extends our knowledge is it introduces a whole cast of musical characters almost completely unknown to us. The most interesting of whom, for me, is Alire Bureau, the individual who was able to take down the transcription of celestial music in the séance in the Rue de Beaune, write the accompaniments, and then subject them to commentary by the spirits themselves.
One final question. What would you like a student or somebody new to musicology to take away from your article?
Gosh, I think I've just said it really. I mean, I think the idea that that music plays a role in so many different cultural and intellectual environments, even in ones like the séance that are perhaps not ones that you'd immediately think of. And I suppose the other thing to take away, particularly if you're outside the kind of mainstream of contemporary musicology, the other thing to take away is that the history of music is not about works and composers that we know and revere in the second quarter of the 21st century. Actually, it's not really about works and composers at all.
Thank you so much for speaking with us today.
It's been a great pleasure. Thank you for your time.
Excellent. Thank you so much.